we do have Qadira Harris, who is the head of global responsibility for Matterport. Matterport is a spatial data company leading the digital transformation of the built world. Qadira has dedicated her career to helping companies be socially responsible and intentionally centers equity and inclusion in her work. Qadira previously held positions at Walmart, AARP, Allstate, and CVS Health. She's passionate about supporting the next generation of leaders and enjoys mentoring and developing others along their career journey. Qadira completed her undergraduate degree at Marquette University and her graduate degree at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So welcome, Qadira. Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
You are, and thank you for asking. Yes, that was great.
Thank you. So I'm really excited to speak with you today. And we have a couple of questions to get us started, but what I want to hear from you first is what are you so passionate about inclusion and diversity in a workplace? It's one of those questions that people come to the practice from very different areas. So I'm really interested to hear what brings you.
Yeah. I think for me, it is the opportunity to get it right. I am shameless about equity. I think that, we can look at this a couple different ways. We can look at it and say, wow, the challenges are so big that, we're never going to be able to move the needle on some of this stuff because of, the history of injustices and all the ways that just candidly, as a collective, we may have shown up wrong. But what excites me, especially in the corporate environment, is that we have the opportunity to get this right. And the other thing that really gets me excited is people. When I think about my colleagues at Matterport, when I think about the colleagues and the friends that I've made on LinkedIn and other social media platforms, folks are hungry to get this right and work together. And so that is what excites me. I may be a little bit of an optimist around that, but that's okay. I think that that's what we need. And so absolutely, it's, like I said, the opportunity that I really believe that we are on the cusp of really turning a major corner around this whole diversity and equity and inclusion conversation. And like I said, the way that people collectively have shown up and are excited and jazzed and are like, yeah, the status quo isn't going to cut it anymore. We can make change. That is absolutely what gets me out of bed every morning.
I couldn't agree more. And it's really, Power to Fly was kind of weirdly perfectly positioned for the last year and a half. And it's been so wonderful to see not only so many people who are new to this journey, like come and join and really see the importance.
That's right.
But you're right. It's how it's really kind of reawakened the importance and the, the cruciality of like, I don't even think that's a word, but of like seizing this moment,
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, so if we're talking about companies, as many people are just getting started on this DEI journey, what are some of the practical steps that companies can use to implement, more of these practices? I know that it's vastly different from startups to large corporations, but what are some of the ways that companies can really start, especially if they haven't historically been part of this journey before?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And, my career, I've worked, Matterport, we're 10 years old, but, high growth startup. And I've worked for large Fortune 100 companies as well. And I think, we have to remember there's no cookie cutter approach. I think that's the first thing to keep in mind. But I do think that there's a couple of things that kind of work across the board. The first is look at the data. Look at who is currently in your organization. It's like sometimes you don't want to look at the report card. You don't want to look at, whatever, but you have to. If you can't, determine where you're headed if you don't know what's going on inside your organization. Look at your policies. Look at how you're hiring. Look at who's being developed and who's being nurtured in your organization. If you're a global company, pay attention to global nuances. That's going to be key. Make sure you're talking to those market leaders in your markets outside of the US. Are you paying attention to those nuances? The other thing that I would say is, ERGs, employee resource groups, they're called a few different things depending on the company, but they're a great place to start. I think the one thing I would say with ERGs is you want to be careful not to overburden them with the responsibility, right, for change. ERGs want to be close to the business. They want to advise. They want to help shape some of these programs and initiatives. But again, you want to be careful that you're not expecting them to solve every problem in the company. That really should be a partnership. The other thing, and this is really important for us at Matterport, is talking to our teams and listening. Feedback is a gift, right? And so, whether or not, when you get that feedback, you can say, okay, this is a change that we can make happen on day one. or do you put it on your roadmap? But again, you can't make these changes if you're not talking to your teams, listening to your people. And you can do that in various ways: surveys, listening sessions, focus groups, again, all the things that we're doing at Matterport. And so I think that's another big one. And then finally, I would say, leadership has to set the tone, right? As you are looking to get some of this stuff going, you have to make sure that leadership is bought in. And again, I've been very fortunate to come into a company where I haven't had one single person that has questioned, where our journey. They're like, look, we're with you. Tell us where we need to be, and we're going to stand behind you. And that is really important as D&I leaders or whoever you may have kind of heading this up in a company. They're going to need that support, and it has to come from the top down.
No, you're absolutely right. It's one of those things where as much as we don't like to think of ourselves as kind of lemmings, it's very ingrained that, I remember different places I've worked where it was not acceptable to talk about, gender inequality when it came to pay structure, or when it came to, representation on, like at the CEO level.
That's right.
And so coming to Power to Fly, it was really refreshing, right? Because not only is this something that's like core to our mission, but being able to say like, hey, we're not really walking the walk that we're trying to get other companies to do. So what can we do to keep improving ourselves?
That's right.
Because you can't lead in the space unless you are consistently trying to improve on your own end.
Yeah.
So you talk about how it's so important to get that top-down buy-in, right? What are some of the common misconceptions that leaders might have when it comes to DEI initiatives? Because if you're trying to get that buy-in and you can't quite get there, what are some of the directions that you could maybe kind of take and reroute?
Yeah, so I think again, there's a couple of things I'm thinking about. One that I often see or hear about is, D&I isn't there's this misconception that D&I isn't the responsibility of the entire company or every employee. And, I often say, no matter who you kind of have championing it, whether it's, maybe sometimes it's a volunteer, someone who's kind of taken it on in addition to their role, or you have a designated person, that person might be the thought leader, around the strategy and all the things, but D&I belongs to everyone in the company. So we have to always keep that in mind. And again, that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions. As I said before, there's no one size fits all to this, right? You really have to look at, of course, there's best practices and benchmarks and all those things, but you really have to look at your business and listen and talk to your people and find out what change needs to happen within your organization. At Matterport, we say it's a million little things, right? And again, there's no kind of one silver bullet's going to solve all of our problems, but it's all those million little things across the entire company that get us there. The other thing, again, the misconception, and we're seeing this kind of rising up in lots of conversation around it, is those performative gestures. We have to be careful about those, right? Sometimes we think that if we can change a logo or, post something about Black Lives Matter, about one post about pay equity, that's going to kind of get us there and again, wave that magic wand. And so we really have to be careful about that as companies and as business leaders. That we don't make those performative gestures and again, then not back up with action. Action is the most important thing. It's just as you said, man, you gotta walk the walk and talk the talk at the same time.
Absolutely. And I mean, it becomes, especially when you're seeing these things be implemented in companies that are really new to this journey and new to really, like you said, going outside of the area of performative gestures, it makes a lot of sense why they haven't done these things first. It doesn't absolve them of it, but it absolutely makes sense. Of course, you're not doing a great job at this because that's not the people that you are trying to now help are not making up any real percentage of people at your organization. So you don't know how you're failing those people. You can't expect to grow this population of your workforce when there's nothing there to draw them, when there's no support, when there's no consideration for where they're coming from, right?
That's right. That's right.
So as these companies are really getting started, what kind of challenges do they face? Like we just touched on, the idea of you're trying to support the Black Lives Matter movement, but you don't have any Black people at your organization. So how are you supporting it? What are some of those challenges that can kind of be expected to face?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a little bit of, not even a little bit, there's a lot of fear, right? Just in getting started, folks are so overwhelmed. I was actually even listening just at the tail end of the previous session. People are afraid of getting it wrong, saying the wrong things. We don't want to make mistakes. We're afraid that we're going to offend. Did I use the right pronoun? If I, say something to my Black colleague or ask a question, am I going to offend them? And now we're on not only bad terms, but, how else is that going to show up or blow up for me, right? And so, just the challenge around getting started, right? Exactly to your point, we have to be okay. The way that we describe it, specifically at Matterport, it's a journey. Right. And when you are on a journey, right, whether you're thinking about it literally or, metaphorically, but when there's journeys, sometimes there's detours, you have to take a pit stop. Sometimes you have to pause. Sometimes you have to ask for directions. Think about, right, your D&I journey within your company kind of is the same way. But on that journey, the most important thing is you got to get started, right, if you want to get to where you want to go. The other thing I would say, that I hear around challenges is, getting everyone on board, getting folks on the same page, it's selling it. When we talk about equity in the workplace, when we talk about creating an inclusive culture, we're really, talking about change, and we're talking about changing the way that systems, again, in any workplace, systems have worked. And now we're asking people to change the way, a lot of times, the way that they may have been operating or thinking or whatever. It really is a paradigm shift. So, again, be patient, getting everyone on board, getting everyone on the same page, helping folks understand, it's about your people, but it also impacts your customers. It impacts innovation, creativity, all those things, right? So, I'm talking through kind of the challenges, but also offering some of the strategies or solutions. The other thing is, just as I said earlier, around these performative, kind of performative D&I work, right? And so making big promises without any action will also be a challenge that companies will face. And so you definitely want to make sure, as leaders, if you are going to come out, even if it's internally, but definitely internally and externally, if you're going to say something to your employees about and make a commitment, right, around your D&I work, if you're going to say to your customers or just say publicly, make these D&I commitments, follow through. And, again, it's okay along your journey to say, oh, we made these commitments and we thought that we were going to end up here on year 2. But here's what's happened, and here's where we really are. Communities, your employees appreciate that vulnerability, right? And so be honest about, the promises you made and then how your actions actually matched up. And then, I think the last thing I'll say is getting everyone to think about their own biases and really think about how does that show up in our own decisions and actions. I always say, I remind people, including myself, we all have biases. We all do, right? And so I can't confront my biases until I can actually admit that I have them, right? So getting people even there. And again, it goes back to that fear that a lot of folks have. Oh my goodness, if I admit that I have this bias, then what's going to happen? But again, the reality is we all have them. And one step further than that, if we don't admit them, the proof is still going to be in the pudding, so to speak, right? Because it's still going to show up in if people, stay at your company. It's still going to be, show up to your point, Meg, about, if we're not hiring people of color or pay equity and all those things. So talk about it. Let's get it out in the open, right? Be comfortable, I always say, with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's a huge hurdle, right? I mean, I love how you tied it back, because you're right. It's the idea of uncovering these biases that you don't want to think about. You don't think about them until they're right in front of you, and that might be very few and far between. Yeah. And so you're right. It's getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's getting comfortable with saying I'm sorry or saying I messed up. Yeah. And at least from my personal experience, those, granted, apologies kind of taste like dirt depending on the situation, but those apologies come a lot more easily when you are truly committed to this work, because it's a lot easier to apologize from a place of, sincerity, when the goal is something you are actually trying to reach. And you can see how, okay, well, that was a misstep and that's not taking me in the direction I want to go. So even just from a personal interest standpoint, you need to be ready to keep, keep apologizing and keep admitting when you don't know. And especially in business, that's not something we're taught to do, right? The fake it till you make it mentality runs deep.
That's absolutely right. And I think, there's this whole conversation around, we need to assume positive intent. And that's absolutely right. Because again, we all are on journeys. All of us are on different places in the journey. All of us have things to learn. I don't care who you are. But I love, you just talked about the way I describe it as well. Absolutely assume positive intent. You also have to take responsibility for your actions and commit to, okay, so what can I do better, right? How do I continue to educate myself? So I love how you're talking about that. That's exactly how I think about it.
Thank you. Okay, so we have this really great question from Diana from the chat. So we're going to jump into her for a second.
Sure.
Diana wants to know, do private organizations work together on this very much? She says, they say, I feel like nonprofits are not shy to create coalitions to collaborate, and most are perpetually short-staffed, so they need those collaborations. What have you experienced in your work history with this?
Yeah, Diana, I love that question. And I think you're right? Historically, we have seen, for example, in the nonprofit sector, organizations, exactly to your point, because they're short-staffed or, just the way that the work evolves, this needing to collaborate. It's one of the reasons why I consider myself very fortunate that under our global responsibility efforts, our D&I and our social impact are housed together. And it's absolutely something that I'm committed to. I'm starting to see it more as well with my colleagues, but I'm definitely committed to, exactly to your point, of reaching across the aisles and not always looking at another company as your competitor in every way, right? This work specifically is big, and there is no way that one company, for example, can solve it. And so if we can come together and potentially run a research project or put together some sort of coalition or put our dollars behind solutions, it is okay if we all share in that. There's no reason why one company has to absolutely be out front, as the only one doing this. Again, we're trying to solve not just national, global issues here. And so I think your question is a great one. I think, again, it's something that more companies and more in the public or private sector are starting to think about, is this collaboration and this cross-functional work. So, you're absolutely right. I think the nonprofit sector has led in that for various reasons, but I'm absolutely starting to see it. And again, it's something that I'm definitely committed to. So if there are companies on this call who want to partner, find me, let's talk, because again, this isn't something that any of us can solve or address in a silo.
Yes, completely true. And any links or any information for contact and that kind of thing that you'd like us to share, I'm more than happy if you drop them into the Zoom chat. I can make sure they make it to the website and post them with the recordings of this as well.
Wonderful.
Okay, so as we talk about the support and the action for all of these initiatives and the changes that need to happen, we talk about them coming kind of from a siloed place, right? So can we talk a little bit about why it's important for overrepresented groups to also become involved and be champions of this, this movement and of the importance of these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the terms overrepresented and underrepresented, right? So if the way that I think about it is, if you're overrepresented, in any type of system, any type of organization, company, et cetera, it means that you likely, again, as a group, have some sort of seat at the table, right? That you are likely, because you are overrepresented, again, I'm talking about as a group, not necessarily each individual, but you are likely in positions of privilege to somehow make change, to somehow make decisions that can impact some change, right? And so representation matters, whether you're going to say, hey, I'm looking around and we're overrepresented in this way, who else needs to be at this table, right? Again, it's that analogy we use when we talk about diversity and inclusion. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance, right? And so if you're overrepresented, you have the privilege, the power, the authority potentially to look around and say, who haven't we asked to dance that's at this party? Right? So that's really what it comes down to, right? And so looking around at how do we get voices, representation from groups that may have been marginalized or that are often left out of the conversation to the conversation, right? So really thinking about it is, again, if I am overrepresented, again, as a group, how do I use my power, my privilege, my position to bring those who are underrepresented to the group as well?
Completely true. And I like how you focused on the idea of being underrepresented as a group, because I feel like you're right. There's a lot of people that don't feel like they have that privilege. They don't feel like they have that safety or that security to speak from, their own perspective and say, hey, this is something that needs to be done, or hey, we're not doing so well at this.
That's right.
And you're right. It's very much something that you kind of have to take a step back, really assess your position and see where your privilege lies. We all have it. It's just like biases. We all have a certain amount of privilege. It's just where it is and to what extent, it protects you or it serves you. And so it's really important to remember that, you might think that you don't have that much power and authority, but you probably have a lot more than you realize.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this idea of these overrepresented groups and how they, really need to stand up, this always leads to a conversation about allyship, right?
Yeah.
So let's kind of talk a little bit about what allyship looks like in the workplace. I'd like us to start off on what it means to be an ally. Hopefully nobody's coming to this conversation without ever having heard the term before, because I feel like it's been everywhere, especially in the last, 8 to 12 months. But let's talk a little bit from a baseline about what it means to be an ally.
Yeah, so I think about allyship or being an ally is exactly as you just described, Meg, is someone who uses their privilege, their power, those are not one and the same, but their privilege or their power to speak, serve, stand up for those who may not have the same privilege, power, authority, et cetera. That's how I describe it, right? Just kind of in basic terms. And I think about it as a journey. Again, I keep using that word. Allyship is not just, I wake up tomorrow and I decide that I am an ally for another group. It really is, I believe, a lifelong, if not a lifelong, years process. You are constantly having to check your biases. You're constantly having to listening to others, especially those who aren't in the position of privilege or power that you might be in, really decentering yourself, right? I think as humans, we tend to want to say, okay, yep, that's happening to that group. And let me tell you about my experience that is similar to what that group of people is going through, right? It's really, you got to decenter yourself a little bit. Take ownership. Again, look at where you have privilege, Meg, exactly as you said, we all have it, right? We all have it, every single one of us. And so figure out how you can use that privilege, how you can use your voice. And then I think the most important thing is take action. So often, we'll say, well, I'm an ally, but there's no action. What are you doing? And I absolutely recognize, and hopefully we all do, everyone's action doesn't have to be the same. Some people, their action might be out protesting and demonstrating. Another person's, action might be speaking, on a panel for their employee resource group. Another person might be using their action to donate and support causes that they care about. Your action doesn't have to be my action. But if you're going to say that you're an ally, you absolutely do need to take action.
Absolutely. I mean, I tend to approach it from a very similar perspective. And you're right, that decentering, that is huge, because so much of the journey to getting to that place where you realize where your privilege and power lies and where you might have been making mistakes, a lot of that is centered on you. And that's okay, because you're trying to break down these preconceptions or these unconscious biases that you have absorbed throughout the course of your life. And so that makes sense. But then when you move that out into the larger world and the larger construct, it can't be about you. It can't be. people don't give themselves nicknames because it's not a thing that happens. So you don't get to say you're an ally. It needs to be something that you are consistently practicing, that you in whatever way you can. Like you said, it doesn't all have to be the same things, but it really needs to be something that continuously happens. You get to say, yeah, that you support these issues, that you support the Black Lives Matter fight, or you support the AAPI community, but that's fine, but you don't get to just say, well, I'm an ally, and then there's nothing else that goes with it.
That's right. Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about how to show you're an ally. You have to show up for these things. You have to do what you can with what you have where you are. But let's talk a little bit about allyship fatigue, because I feel like in certain ways, this conversation becomes a lot like the environmental arguments, where it's not that everyone needs to be perfect and all like 100% green and whatever. You need a lot of people to do this imperfectly to keep helping, to kind of make that difference. So let's talk a little bit about allyship fatigue when it comes to these social justice issues.
Yeah. Well, I think, keeping in mind, again, that this is a journey. And if you're going to be in it for the long haul, there's a couple of things. You need to prioritize your mental health. I'm a big proponent of that. And you're absolutely right. I mean, especially over the past, let's say 18 to 24 months, the wear and tear emotionally on so many of us around all of these issues. So absolutely, the fatigue is real. Prioritize your mental health. The one thing that I would say is, when you're thinking about being an ally, put yourself in the shoes occasionally of just kind of put yourself in the mental shoes of someone who doesn't have the privilege to kind of take the day off from social injustices. And I'm not suggesting then that means you should keep getting back up and going at it and again, wear yourself into the ground. But again, when you think about allyship and you're decentering yourself, think about those folks who don't get to take a day off, whether it's because of their race or their gender, or their sexuality, or their, different abilities, et cetera. Right? For me, when I think about where I desire for others to identify me as an ally, that is what kind of helps me kind of work through the fatigue to some degree, because again, I'm kind of taking on their struggle as my own, and I recognize they don't get to, take off a day. There's no days off, right, when I want to show up. But again, I do think, prioritizing your mental health, realizing that there's no quick fixes, right? So I think sometimes people kind of wear themselves out because they're expecting that if I just work really hard over the next year and I really show up, right, that I should be good. And I think sometimes that's also where the fatigue comes into play, because you kind of wear yourselves thin, you kind of go at it really hard and fast, for a set amount of time and are expecting all of this change, when really, again, it is calculated and is over time. And so really thinking about that consistency and longevity and not expecting that it's going to be an overnight process is another way, I think, to kind of get over or combat some of that fatigue, because you're not expecting that it's going to be this quick fix that you can just kind of run headfirst into addressing.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, is, protecting your personal mental health is paramount, because nobody else is going to do that for you.
That's right.
And other people don't have the knowledge and don't have the capability of saying, hey, I think you're about to burn out on this, so like, let's just chill. And it makes a really good point, like it's not even that you have to constantly one up yourself even. I'm seeing, thank you to Facebook, what was it, anniversaries, reminders, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I'm seeing a lot, in my Facebook memories of, the posts that I shared last year, and, the links that I was sharing, and how about you try this? And I went to, all these different protests, and my mental health and my mental state now is in a completely different place. And so while I'm glad that I did those things then, and that was what helped me to really like feel more in control and feel like I was like adding to the positive column, doing something, that was fine. But the fact that I don't feel like doing that now, okay, that's fine. What else am I doing to move the needle? What else am I doing internally? Is what I'm trying, I kind of think of it in like this street painting sense. Like, this might look really great and be, super, Instagrammable or whatever, and I hope it's going to spread. But is it really helping the people that I'm trying to help? Is it really helping the people that need it? Or is this something that is more about performance and awareness when there's already awareness. If somebody's not aware of this, they are willfully not aware. So
yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. All right. So I've run us over on time. I'm so sorry. I hope you didn't have a hard stop. But Qadira, it was absolutely wonderful to get to speak with you. And I just want to say huge thank you for sharing, sharing with our community. If you want to send me any links, I'm happy to throw them in the chat there. Is there anything you'd like to say before we bounce to the next chat?
Wow, just thank you, Meg. This was amazing. Thanks everyone for just, I think the first step is just the hunger or the desire to learn more. And so the fact that the folks on, this session or that are tuning in, you've taken a huge first step, or wherever you are in that journey. And this is about becoming. We are becoming a diverse and inclusive, work space for all of us, right? And so just think about it as a long game. But thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. This was fantastic.
Thank you.